The salty ocean breeze whispered through the early morning air, carrying with it the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. The sun was beginning its slow ascent, casting golden streaks over the horizon. Seagulls cawed overhead, their wings cutting through the sky as they circled, scanning the sand for scraps left behind by the previous day's visitors. It was peaceful, the kind of morning that made beachgoers stretch their arms in contentment, taking in the scent of salt and damp sand. A few early risers had already begun their routines, joggers pacing along the boardwalk, surfers paddling out toward the waves, a couple walking hand in hand, leaving deep footprints in the soft sand. Life on the beach moved forward, as it always did. But amidst the activity there was one figure that remained motionless. A lone German shepherd sat near the water's edge, his deep brown eyes fixed on the horizon. He was not playing, not sniffing for food, not chasing the waves like other dogs often did. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his body tense, his tail unmoving, his gaze locked onto something no one else could see. The first morning he appeared, few people noticed him. To the casual observer, he might have looked like a lost pet, momentarily separated from his owner. But as the hours passed and the tide rolled in and out, the dog never moved. He remained seated in the same exact spot, staring at the vast expanse of the ocean as if it held the answer to some unspoken question. By noon, beachgoers had begun to take notice. "Is that dog waiting for someone?" a woman asked as she spread out her towel. A vendor nearby, who had been selling cold drinks for years, glanced over and nodded. "Been there since sunrise," he said, rubbing the sweat from his brow. "Hasn't touched a thing." A few kind-hearted people tried to approach, calling to the shepherd in soothing voices. Some knelt down, holding out pieces of bread or offering a bottle of water. But every time, the dog reacted the same way. His ears twitched slightly at the sound of their voices, but his gaze never strayed from the sea. A young boy attempted to throw a ball toward him, hoping to coax him into play. The ball landed a few feet away, rolling in the sand. The dog didn't so much as glance at it. By sunset, the whispers had grown. "He must be lost," a jogger murmured. "Or abandoned," someone else suggested. But the German shepherd did not leave. He sat through the chilly ocean breeze, his fur ruffling in the wind, his body tense but unwavering. And when the last of the visitors packed up their belongings and left for the night, he remained alone. The second day came and went much the same way. He was there before the first beachgoers arrived, his posture unchanged. The ocean waves crashed in their endless rhythm, but the shepherd did not flinch. Occasionally, when a car engine roared from the street beyond the dunes, his ears would flick toward the sound. His body would tense just slightly, his muscles coiling as if he were preparing to spring forward. But every time, the sound would fade, the car would pass, and the dog would sink back into stillness. The third day arrived, and concern began to spread through the community. A local lifeguard had taken notice of the shepherd's presence. He had watched from his tower as the dog sat beneath the hot sun, moving only to shift positions in the sand. "He's waiting for someone," the lifeguard remarked to a friend. "I've seen it before, that kind of stillness. It's not just a lost dog wandering around. He believes someone is coming back for him." The thought sent a chill through those who heard it. That morning, Lucas, a man who ran along the beach every day, noticed the dog for the first time. At first, he assumed it was just another stray. He had seen plenty of abandoned animals before, ones that had been left behind by careless owners, left to fend for themselves in unfamiliar places. But something about this dog was different. Lucas slowed his pace as he approached, wiping sweat from his forehead. The shepherd didn't acknowledge him. His body remained stiff, his gaze never wavering from the distant blue stretch of the ocean. Lucas frowned. He knelt down a few feet away, studying the dog's posture. "Who are you waiting for, buddy?" he murmured. For the first time, the German shepherd moved. Not much, just a small flick of his ear, the faintest shift of his head. But he did not turn fully, did not make eye contact. Lucas exhaled, feeling something tighten in his chest. There was something in this dog's presence that unsettled him. A quiet sort of pain. A deep, unshakable longing. And in that moment, Lucas knew. This wasn't just another stray. This wasn't a dog searching for scraps or shelter. This was a dog with a story that had left him sitting in the sand, waiting for someone who was never coming back. Lucas just didn't know it yet. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling as he jogged away that morning. Something about the dog stayed with him. The unwavering stillness, the quiet desperation in his posture, the way he ignored everything except the horizon. It wasn't just sadness. It was hope, and hope could be dangerous. That afternoon, Lucas returned to the beach. This time, he wasn't in running gear. He had a bottle of water, a small bowl, and some boiled chicken wrapped in foil. He wasn't sure what he expected, but deep down he knew. The dog would still be there. And he was. The German shepherd hadn't moved an inch from his spot near the shore. The tide had rolled in and out, but the sand beneath him remained pressed down from where he had been sitting for days. Lucas approached slowly, careful not to startle him. He knelt a few feet away and gently placed the bowl on the sand, pouring fresh water into it. Then, he unwrapped the chicken and set it beside the bowl. "You have to eat, buddy," he said softly. The dog's ears twitched, acknowledging the sound of Lucas's voice, but his eyes, those deep, soulful eyes, remained locked on the horizon. Lucas waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, the German shepherd took a single cautious step forward, then another. Lucas held his breath. The dog lowered his head, sniffing at the food. He hesitated, as if some invisible chain held him back, some internal conflict raging between hunger and loyalty. Then, at last, he took a small, deliberate bite. Lucas let out a slow exhale. Progress. But as soon as the shepherd finished eating, he retreated, right back to his place by the water's edge. Lucas's chest tightened. He wasn't just hungry. He wasn't just surviving. He was waiting. Determined to find answers, Lucas started asking around. The vendors knew nothing. The lifeguards had seen the dog, but assumed he was just another stray. The fishermen who had been there since early morning confirmed what Lucas had feared. The dog had been in the exact same spot for over 3 days. One of the older fishermen, Miguel, scratched his beard thoughtfully as Lucas explained the situation. "I don't know who he belongs to," Miguel admitted, "but I can tell you this, he's not waiting for just anyone." Lucas frowned. "What do you mean?" Miguel sighed. "I've had dogs my whole life. When one waits like that without moving, without losing hope, it's because he believes deep in his heart that his person is coming back." The words sent a chill down Lucas's spine. "What if his owner isn't coming back?" Lucas asked. "What if he doesn't know that yet?" Miguel gave a slow nod, his weathered eyes dark with understanding. "Then he'll wait," the old man said, "until he can't anymore." Lucas returned to the beach just before sunset, determined to break through to the dog. He sat down a few feet away, letting silence settle between them. The sky was painted in deep hues of orange and purple, the waves crashing softly against the shore. And then, out of nowhere, the dog let out a sound that made Lucas's chest tighten. a deep, low whimper. Not hunger, not fear, grief. Lucas had seen it before. He worked as a volunteer at an animal shelter where abandoned dogs often cried for their owners, not understanding why they had been left behind. "Hey," Lucas whispered. "It's okay." He extended his hand, palm up, letting the dog decide. For the first time in days, the German Shepherd turned away from the ocean. Just for a second. It was brief, but it was enough. Lucas knew what it meant. The dog was beginning to trust him, and that meant there was still hope. Lucas had cracked the first layer of the German Shepherd's unwavering loyalty, but he knew this was just the beginning. The dog still refused to leave his spot. His eyes still searched the horizon, but something had changed. He had acknowledged Lucas. That was enough for now. Lucas sat near him, careful not to invade his space. He spoke softly, as if he and the dog were old friends. "You know, I get it," Lucas murmured, "what it's like to wait for someone who's never coming back." The wind blew gently, stirring the fine sand between them. The dog's ears twitched at the sound of Lucas's voice, but his gaze remained locked on the waves. Lucas sighed. He had seen abandoned dogs before, but this one was different. His loyalty was unshakable. Lucas needed more information. He spent the next few hours checking local shops and cafes, asking if anyone had seen the dog arrive or knew of someone missing a German Shepherd. No one had answers. Then, just as he was about to give up, a teenage boy sitting on the boardwalk overheard his questions. "Hey, mister," the kid called out. "You talking about that dog down there?" Lucas turned. "Yeah. Do you know anything about him?" The boy hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Sort of. I was here a few nights ago. I think I saw what happened." Lucas's heartbeat quickened. "Tell me everything." The boy rubbed his hands on his jeans, glancing away before speaking. "It was like 3 nights ago," he started. "I was skating on the boardwalk when I saw this old car pull up near the dunes. The driver got out, opened the door, and the dog jumped out, all happy, wagging his tail and everything." Lucas clenched his jaw. He already knew where this was going. "But then," the boy continued, voice lower now, "the guy just got back in the car. The dog tried to jump back in, too, but he shoved him away." Lucas felt his stomach twist. The boy stared down at his sneakers, almost ashamed. "I didn't think it was real at first, you know. I thought maybe the guy was coming back, but he didn't. He just drove off. And the dog chased after the car for a little bit, but then he stopped. He just sat there." Lucas clenched his fists. He had been right. The dog wasn't lost. He had been abandoned. And still, he waited. Lucas walked back to the beach, his chest burning with quiet rage. He had seen cruelty before, but this was betrayal. The German Shepherd was still there, his posture strong, his hope unbroken. Lucas sat beside him, exhaling slowly. He didn't reach for him, didn't speak at first. He just let the silence settle. Then, finally, he said the words no one else had dared to say. "He's not coming back, buddy." The dog didn't move. Lucas's throat tightened. "You deserve better," he whispered. For the first time, the German Shepherd blinked. His ears tilted slightly at the sound of the Lucas's voice. He was listening. And then he turned his head completely. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Lucas saw it. A tiny crack in the dog's hope. Maybe he didn't fully understand yet. Maybe some part of him still believed his owner would return. But another part, deep down, was beginning to accept the truth. Lucas swallowed hard. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against the dog's fur. The German Shepherd didn't pull away. It was just a moment, a brief, hesitant touch, but it was enough. Lucas had broken through, and for the first time in 3 days, the dog had finally let someone in. The German Shepherd had finally let Lucas touch him. It was a small victory, but a powerful one. Lucas knew he had to be careful. This dog had spent 3 days waiting for someone who was never coming back. His loyalty had been betrayed, and earning his trust would take patience. That night, Lucas made a decision. He wasn't leaving the beach without the dog. The sky turned deep shades of orange and purple as the sun sank into the horizon. Most of the beachgoers had left, but Lucas stayed. He sat a few feet away from the German Shepherd, letting the soft rhythm of the waves settle between them. He had brought food again, boiled chicken and rice this time, something more comforting. The dog ate slower than before. His ears perked up every time a car passed on the road above the dunes. Still hoping. Lucas exhaled. "I know you think he's coming back," he said gently. "But, buddy, he's not." The dog's tail gave a single, slow wag before settling again. Lucas studied him. This dog had been raised well. His coat was still relatively clean, his posture strong. He had been loved once, and that was the worst part. He hadn't always been unwanted. Lucas made a plan. First, he needed to get the dog to leave the spot on his own. If he forced him, it would only reinforce the fear of abandonment. The shepherd needed to choose. Lucas stood up, brushing the sand off his jeans. He took a deep breath and started walking away. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he heard the soft sound of paws shifting in the sand. Lucas stopped, looked over his shoulder. The German Shepherd was still sitting, but now his ears were fully perked. His deep brown eyes were locked onto Lucas, something shifting inside them. Lucas turned back around and took another step, then another shuffling noise. Lucas's pulse quickened. He knelt down, patted his leg gently. "Come on, boy." The dog stood up. Lucas held his breath as the shepherd took one hesitant step, then another. And then he was following. It wasn't perfect. The German Shepherd kept looking back toward the ocean, his body tense, as if torn between hope and reality. Lucas didn't rush him. He gave him space, let him decide. They reached the parking lot near the dunes. Lucas's truck was parked a few feet away, but he didn't lead the dog there immediately. Instead, he sat down on the curb and waited. The German Shepherd stood near him. His eyes flickered between the beach and the man sitting beside him. A long silence stretched between them. Then, without a sound, the shepherd took a deep breath and lowered himself onto the pavement next to Lucas. Lucas swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Good boy," he murmured. It was a choice. For the first time, the dog had chosen something other than waiting. Lucas didn't push him. He sat with him for over an hour, letting the evening wrap around them like a quiet understanding. Finally, he stood and walked toward his truck, opened the passenger side door. The German Shepherd stared at it. Lucas patted the seat. "It's up to you, buddy." For a long moment, the dog didn't move. Lucas felt his heart pounding in his chest. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, the shepherd jumped into the truck. Lucas let out a shaky breath. He shut the door gently, got into the driver's seat, started the engine. The German Shepherd sat tall, his body stiff, his eyes still flickering toward the road that led back to the beach. He wasn't shaking, he wasn't panicking. But Lucas could tell he was still holding on to something still wondering, still hoping. Lucas gripped the wheel, his voice quiet but firm. Not this time. The drive home was silent. But for the first time in 4 days, the German Shepherd wasn't alone. The ride home was quiet. Lucas kept glancing at the German Shepherd, who sat stiffly in the passenger seat. His body remained tense, his eyes flickering between the road ahead and the direction they had come from, as if still expecting to see his owner's car appear in the distance. Lucas swallowed hard. Not this time. The drive took about 20 minutes. Lucas lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, where the streets were quiet, lined with old oak trees. It wasn't much, but it was home. As he pulled into the driveway, the German Shepherd finally turned his head to truly look at Lucas. Lucas turned off the engine and met his gaze. "Yeah, buddy, this is it." He opened the door, stepped out, and waited. The shepherd hesitated. His ears flicked back, his body still hovering in uncertainty. Then, after a long moment, he jumped down from the truck. Lucas let out a slow breath. Good boy. He walked toward the front porch, unlocking the door. The shepherd stood at the threshold. His paw lifted slightly, hovering in the air, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to step inside. Lucas didn't rush him. He simply stepped inside and waited. Seconds passed. Then, finally, the German Shepherd took his first step into his new home. Inside, Lucas didn't overwhelm him. He let the dog explore on his own. He watched as the shepherd sniffed the air, taking in his surroundings. His paws patted lightly over the wooden floor, cautious but steady. Lucas had kept an old dog bed from when he used to foster rescues. He pulled it out, placed it near the living room, and set a fresh bowl of water nearby. The shepherd noticed, but didn't go near it yet. Instead, he sat down near the door. Lucas ran a hand through his hair. The habit was still there. Waiting. Hoping. Lucas knelt beside him, speaking softly. "You don't have to wait anymore, buddy." The shepherd didn't move. Lucas sighed. He wasn't going to force it. "All right," he murmured. "We'll do this your way." He stood, grabbed a blanket, and tossed it across the couch. If the dog wanted space, he'd have it. Lucas turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the porch lamp filtering through the curtains. He stretched out on the couch, tossing an arm over his eyes. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, just as Lucas was beginning to drift off, he heard it. The quietest shuffle of paws on the floor. His heart skipped a beat, but he didn't move. Another sound, closer this time. A soft exhale. Lucas opened his eyes. The German Shepherd had finally moved away from the door, and now he was lying beside the couch. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. He let out a slow breath and whispered, "Good boy." The dog's tail twitched, the tiniest, hesitant wag, and for the first time in 4 nights, the shepherd finally closed his eyes. The next morning, Lucas woke up to something warm pressing against his hand. At first, he wasn't sure if he had imagined it. The living room was still dimly lit by the early morning sun filtering through the curtains. His body ached slightly from sleeping on the couch, but as he turned his head, he saw him. The German Shepherd was still lying beside the couch, but now his large head rested against Lucas's hand. Lucas barely breathed. He didn't want to scare him off. Slowly, cautiously, he moved his fingers, brushing them gently over the dog's fur. The shepherd didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned into the touch. Lucas swallowed hard. "Hey, buddy." The dog let out a deep, quiet sigh. It was the first real sign of relief Lucas had seen in him. And in that moment, Lucas knew. The waiting was over. The real test came later that day. Lucas found an old leash from his fostering days and approached carefully. The shepherd lifted his head, but didn't shrink away. Good sign. "Want to go for a walk?" Lucas asked. The shepherd didn't move at first. Then, to Lucas's surprise, he stood up. Lucas knelt, clipping the leash onto the dog's collar. It was worn, but still fastened securely. That meant his owner had put it on him that night, knowing exactly what he was about to do. Lucas clenched his jaw, taking a deep breath. He pushed his anger aside. That man was the past. The shepherd's future was what mattered now. They walked slowly through the neighborhood, giving the dog time to take in the new sights and smells. At first, he was cautious. His ears stayed alert, his body tense, as if expecting something bad to happen. But then, Lucas felt the leash loosen. The shepherd wasn't pulling away anymore. By the time they reached the small park a few blocks away, Lucas decided to take a chance. He knelt beside the dog and unclipped the leash. For a moment, the shepherd just stood there. Then, for the first time since Lucas had met him, he ran. Not away, not looking back. Just running. His paws pounded against the soft grass, his body moving effortlessly. He wasn't searching anymore. He was free. Lucas watched, his throat tightening. He had no idea what the dog had been called before. But now, watching him race across the field, Lucas knew exactly what his name should be. Freedom. Lucas crouched down, opening his arms. "Come here, Freedom." The shepherd skidded to a stop. His ears perked up. And then, for the first time, he wagged his tail and ran straight into Lucas's arms. Not looking back, not waiting anymore, just choosing to be home. That night, Freedom didn't sleep by the door. He didn't curl up on the hard floor, facing the exit, as if still expecting to be left behind. Instead, he stepped onto the old dog bed Lucas had pulled out for him and lay down. Lucas barely had time to process it before Freedom let out a deep, slow sigh, his body completely at ease. No tension, no waiting, just rest. Lucas sat on the couch, watching him. His throat felt tight. He had taken in rescues before, but none had ever broken his heart the way this dog had. None had ever waited 3 days for someone who didn't deserve them. And none had ever looked at Lucas with that kind of trust. Over the next few weeks, Freedom settled in. At first, it was small things. The way he followed Lucas around the house, always a few steps behind. The way his ears twitched every time Lucas spoke, as if waiting for his name. The way he started wagging his tail just a little when Lucas came home. He never begged for food, never demanded attention. But every night, without fail, he would walk over and rest his head on Lucas's knee. Just for a moment. His way of saying, "I'm still here." And Lucas would always scratch behind his ears and whisper, "Yeah, buddy, me too." Freedom's story is a testament to the unbreakable loyalty of dogs and the power of second chances. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every dog deserves a second chance.